Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jen Weesey. I'll be your moderator for the webinar today. I work with the Grails and Micronaut team at Here at Object Computing, and we'd like to thank you again for joining us on the live webinar. We are really excited to be able to share with you the information that Sergio is going to be sharing with you all. He's joining us live from Spain and will be your presenter. He's a core member of the Grails and Micronaut team at Here at Object Computing. And he's going to be showing you how to upgrade from Grails 3 to Grails 4 in a step-by-step demo and showing you how easy it is to upgrade your Grails applications. You'll also get to be able to see how to benefit from the Micronaut integration that's available with this new iteration of the framework. So with that, we'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Sergio.
Thank you, Jen. Hello, everyone. My name is Sergio del Amo. I am a senior engineer here at OCI. Been in the team since early 2017, so it's going to be 3 years when we turn to 2020. I work in the Micronaut and Grails teams here at OCI. I'm based in Spain, close to Madrid. I write a newsletter about about Grails, Groovy, the Groovy ecosystem, JEP, Micronaut, and basically everything I'm currently working on. It's a weekly free news, normally weekly, now it's almost bi-weekly. But it's a free newsletter. If you are into Grails, you will probably like the newsletter. So go ahead and subscribe. I organize a conference called Grails, which is a JVM conference in Madrid in 26, 27, 28 of March of 2020. We have already a couple of speakers confirmed. So if you are, especially if you are in Europe, I strongly recommend you to take a look, and hopefully I can see you in person in Madrid. For today, I want to start. So my key takeaway from this presentation is that a migration from Grails 3 to Grails 4 is much easier than a migration for Grails 2 to Grails 3. And what I have done is we have one website, which is the plugins website, which is under plugins.grails.org. That domain points to a Grails application, which until yesterday used to be a Grails 3 application. And that application basically has a cron job. And when the application starts, it contacts the Bintray API. It fetches all the plugins, or basically all the packages that are registered there as Grails plugin. And for each plugin, since normally a Bintray package is associated with a GitHub repo, it goes to the GitHub README page. It goes to the GitHub repository. It looks for either a nasty doc or a markdown README file. It basically takes that README content to be displayed on the portal. And it also reads the GitHub number of stars. And it does this thing every hour. It doesn't have any persistence. It basically saves everything into memory. We deploy it to Cloud Foundry. So this used to be a Grails 3 application, which as a network HTTP client, it was using OKHTTP and Mozy to basically bind a JSON payload to a Java object. And it used to use as well in a class HTTP builder, which is the old REST client. I have replaced that with Micronaut HTTP client, and you will see it reduces, in my opinion, the code, and also gets rid of a couple of dependencies. So what I'm going to show to you is I have slides about the steps for a Grails 3 to Grails 4 migration, but I want to do it on reverse. I'm going to show you the steps of a real migration, and then we will discuss, if time allows, the different steps, and you can have those steps as a reference. So I recommend you to have like a checklist. I have like a checklist that I can go when I need to migrate my applications. So if you have never visited the Grails portal, this is how the Grails plugin portal looks like. So by default, this is a website running, this is a static website embedded in a Grails application. When you click to plugins, you go to a different URL, and that's, right now it's a Grails 4 application. It used to be a Grails 3 application. You see here the starts, the name of the plugin. This information, it's actually the README retrieved from the GitHub repository. So that README file is read and basically consumed there. So I'm going to show you, I have here two IDE windows. Hopefully the font is big enough for everyone. This is the Gradle properties file of the old version, and this is the of the Grails 3 version, and this is the Gradle properties files of the new one. The first step, let me, so I have the migrations done, so I have here in another monitor the different commits that I have done. You can check those commits if you want in the repo. The repo is available on GitHub. So the first step that I did is, I have, so this application doesn't have persistent, doesn't use GORM at all. So you see here, I have a GORM version defined. I don't have any GORM version here. Additional things that I have done is in application.yaml, I have removed the whole data source configuration and the whole Hibernate configuration. So I don't have this snippet, and I don't have the snippet where I configure the different data sources per environment. That's gone. And also in build.gradle, couple of things that you normally have when you use GORM in a Grails application. The first thing is you will apply the Hibernate 5 Grails plugin, Gradle plugin, sorry, in the build script class path. Since I am not using that, I have removed that. So you see I don't have it here. And also in the dependencies of the app itself, you will see I don't have neither the Hibernate Grails 3 plugin, neither the Hibernate core dependency. Those are gone from my applications. If you are using GORM, which chances are you will, because many Grails applications use GORM, you will need to update both the Gradle Hibernate Grails plugin and the Hibernate core dependency to 5.4.0, but that's an easy change. I will show it to you, and that should be an easy part of the upgrade. So whenever you do an upgrade, take your chances to see unused dependencies. That's what I did. And if you have unused dependencies, it's a good moment to basically remove those. The next step is to upgrade the Grails version. So I have gone to Gradle properties, and I have changed from Grails 3.3.0 to Grails 4.0.1. Then you can remove both the Grails wrapper version and the Gradle wrapper versions. Those are no longer used. So I have gone ahead and removed those. Another thing that I did is in this application, I was using a fantastic plugin, which is the Schwartz plugin, which is a plugin that is you can use in Grails to basically create an abstraction on top of Quartz and basically handle the whole scheduling of jobs. I had a really simple so let me remember the name of the class is Sync Plugin Job Service. So I have such a simple logic for the job that I actually simplify this thing and remove the use of the plugin. So I have the plugin, the Schwartz plugin. Normally, the way you define a job is you implement Schwartz job. You can do things like disable concurrent execution. You can has a really powerful syntax for building triggers. For me, it was simpler because remember that every Grails application, both Grails 3 and Grails 4, they are a Spring Boot application. So what I have done is I came to application.ruby, and I annotated my application class with enable scheduling. And then I went to the service that was implementing the Swartz job. I actually removed the Swartz dependency from my build.gradle. So I used to have this dependency. I have removed that from my build.gradle, so I don't have it in the build.gradle of the Grails for application. And what I have done is I have used that schedule annotation. So that schedule annotation takes, for example, here a fixed rate. That means when the job is done, when it starts again, and this is the number of milliseconds. So this is 1 hour. And basically, I am starting the job 1 second after the application started. So 1 second, I basically go ahead and call the Grails plugin service request. And this, if you are interested in checking this thing, I think this actually highlights a really nice thing that you can do with Grails is the whole async module. So it uses a lot of tasks with onComplete, basically to parallelize fetching all the information about the plugins. So you will see there is a lot of tasks and a lot of onComplete. So yeah, if you have a requirement such as the one that I had in this application, which was to basically check a lot of different URLs, if you want to check this application, I think it will be maybe a good inspiration, a good example of places where Grails really shines. So I replaced the Swartz plugin with the simple Spring Boot data scheduled annotation. In order to do that, I did two things: enable scheduling, and then I have one job. It's important you set lazy init false, so that this job is basically instantiated on startup. And then I added the add schedule annotation. Couple of things more. If you create a Grails for application from a startup, you will see that in the Spring Boot Gradle plugin, the argument JVM args, I have set it up the same way you will get when you create an application. So if you go to build.gradle in the old, you will see that you used to have this property only enabled. I have set it up also with the XMX for the memory, etc. So yeah, if you want to have your application as a brand new application, you can change that. Another thing that I have done is I added the Spring Boot developer tools. So in Grails 3, we had a reload with something called Spring Loaded. Spring Loaded is no longer around. It had an incompatibility, I believe, with, I don't know if it was JDK 11. So basically it's gone. So the way Spring Boot recommends to get reloading is to use Spring Boot dev tools, which basically will restart the server. There are some files such as GSPs, and actually let me do something. Let me show you a video, a small video that I show you, so that you see that you can get hot reloading with Spring Boot dev tools, and you will have a really nice developer experience with Grails 4 as well. So I have the video in my presentation, and I am going to show it to you. Let me just do that. So you will need two things. I have here a live reload Chrome plugin. So that's a plugin that you install in Chrome. And then I am referencing here in the Spring Boot DevTools page. I have a brand new Grails application, which has this Spring Developer Tools dependency. And here I have in application.yaml, I have a list of classes that I want to exclude from server restarts. And those are the GSPs and also the .json files, which are the files from the basically the JSON views of Grails. So if I go ahead here, I am showing in the video, I modify a GSP, you will see in the bottom of the console that the server doesn't restart, but my page got updated automatically for me. So whenever you are modifying a GSP, you don't have to restart the server. And that's why we have those additional entries in the application.yaml. I am here creating a controller. and you will see that the server is going to restart. So you see in the top bottom right corner, you will see the server restarting. So I'm going to define a hello controller, which is going to return a map, which is going to have a key of message and hello world. I'm going to create then a view. So that's going to be a GSP. So I'm going to create a folder following the Grails convention, a hello folder, an index.gsp file, which is going to contain a plain, simple HTML page. So yeah. And inside that page, I'm going to render the model that was passed to the Grails view. So I'm going to render, remember I was returning from the controller a map with the key message. So I'm going to basically render that in a header of level 1. So if you see the browser on the, you see the browser, you see hello world. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and modify my controller, and you will see on the bottom right corner, the server will restart. And due to the thing that the way that I am using in Chrome, the live reload plugin, the browser will restart and show hello moon. So as you will see, that this, the use of Spring developer tools in combination with a live reload plugin and the fact that you can edit the GSP will mean that you can get really a lot of speed in your Grails for application development. So I added those to the Grails 3 plugins. So I have the Spring Dev tools, and in application.yaml, I have this extra. This is the old one or the new one? This new one. I don't have the list, but I should have the list of exclusions for things that I don't want to hot reload. Then what else? I have updated the asset pipeline plugin. So that's something that you should always check. So the asset pipeline plugin is a magnificent plugin in the ecosystem, and it's used by default when you create a Grails application. Just keep this page in your bookmarks. The latest version, even here it says 3.0.10, is actually 3.0.11. So what I have done is I've gone from, this was defined in Gradle properties. So this was defined here. I was using in the Grails application the 2.14.3 version. I have gone to the 3.0.11. Also make sure that you are, the way you apply the plugin has changed. So make sure that you are applying the plugin also by using this syntax and not the old syntax. It used to be like something like this. Make sure you are using the new one. So yeah, as I was saying before, whenever you do a Grails upgrade, take the opportunity to upgrade the dependencies and see if you can upgrade them. Another thing that I have done is, and you will need to do is, there is a breaking change in the Spring Boot Gradle plugin. Before they used to set up the add resources true. That's deprecated, and you will see an exception if you don't change that. This is their best replacement for that. There is a blog post in the Spring, I don't know if it's in the Spring developer blog, but basically it's around the Spring Gradle plugin, which explains this change. So I will link to that in the slides. So yeah, you will need to do this change in your application. Otherwise, you will see an exception on a startup. Another thing is Grails for applications register the Micronaut application context as the parent context of the Spring Boot context. So in order for get Micronaut dependency injection, you have to add to your build.gradle dependencies, you have to add the Micronaut inject Groovy dependencies. You don't need to add a version because the Grails BOM, the build of materials of Grails, defines a version. Right now, I believe it's 1.1.4. You can tweak that. I don't think there is any compatibility. it's 1.14 because the moment it was released, 1.14 was, I believe, the latest stable version, so that's the reason why it's that. But you can use more modern versions of Micronaut with Grails for application. That will be no problem. So just remember to add this if you want to use Micronaut beans in a Grails for application. I will show you later an example of how to use a Micronaut bean, but yeah, bear that in mind. Another thing that I have done is I removed the JEP dependencies because I don't have any JEP tests. So I used to have the HTML unit dependencies here and the Grails JEP plugin. I like a lot JEP. JEP is an abstraction on top of Selenium, which is fantastic and is really integrated into Grails to do like integration tests when you have like an HTML UI, but we didn't have any tests here in this project, so I have removed that. If we add tests, we will add it back. Another thing that you will need to do is you will need to update the Grails wrapper. So the Grails wrapper are these two files, Grails WView and Grails WView.bat. To use in Windows, basically the same concept as with the Gradle wrapper. The idea is that developers don't need to run, don't even need to have Grails installed in their computers. They can just run Grails and they will enter the Grails console. I don't use the Grails wrapper a lot, to be honest. I mostly drive my applications using the Gradle task. But yeah, if you are one way to actually it crashed for me. One way to upgrade the Grails wrapper, and probably the easiest way, is create a new Grails for application from scratch and copy those two files and replace those two files. Another big change is the upgrade of Gradle. Grails 3 applications officially supported Gradle 3.5 and unofficially supported Gradle 4. We have moved Grails for applications to Gradle 5, which was the latest stable release of Gradle when Grails 4 was released. Now there is Gradle 6 out there. But when you create a new Grails for application, you will see that we use Gradle 5.1. I have actually updated this application up to Gradle 5.6.4. I have not seen any major difficulties in upgrading to higher versions of Gradle 5. Gradle 6 is a bit of a different story. But you should be fine running Grails for applications using Gradle 5. You can either create a new Grails for application and copy those both Gradle wrapper jar or Gradle properties, or Gradle WView or Gradle WView.bat. Don't just update the version here. Or another way that you can update the Gradle version is by running the Gradle wrapper. You run Gradle wrapper, wrapper, and I believe it's Gradle version, and you set up the version right here. So this is the official way to update. Don't just edit this file, because in these major versions sometimes the Gradle wrapper itself changes. And the easiest way probably is just create a new Gradle application. In a terminal, you can just run Gradle wrapper. It will generate those 4 files and just replace those files in your project. That should be fine. What else? I have updated this application uses a third-party library to render HTML from Markdown. So the README files in GitHub are in Markdown, and we need to render them in HTML. What I have done is I have updated the dependency, and so it used to be 0.26, now it's 0.50, and it was actually a breaking change for me. So I have this Markdown render service, which actually has changed a little bit in the way that it used to return, the parse method used to return a node type. Now it returns a document type. It was like a 1-minute change, but yeah, it was a breaking change for me. Another thing that I have done is I have added more additional logging, and I have annotated a couple of classes with Groovy AST to a string. Not required. This is optional. Just it will give you like a more human representation when you want to basically log a class. So I have a couple of instances where I have log, for example. I am here logging bintrate package simple with toString, and I have annotated this class with the AST transformation of toString. So just benefiting from the great AST transformation that Ruby provides. A big change is this library used to do a lot of this Grails application does a lot of HTTP requests. So this is, for example, a class that was using Mossy, which is actually let me show it to you. Mossy HTTP bind probably. So it's a library from Square, and it's typically used in combination with OKHTTP. So basically, it's a modern JSON library to parse JSON into Java objects. And its companion often is OKHTTP client, which is an HTTP client. So I have replaced these two dependencies with Micronaut because Micronaut has already in the HTTP client the functionality to bind a JSON payload to a Java object. So this used to be my code. So I have here an HTTP client, the Mossy. I have to define an adapter to bind to a bintrate package. This is a Pollo. And this is how it looked like. I have this URL, which uses Ruby string interpolation. I have here authorization. I needed basically to create so this for bintrate uses basic auth. What that means is takes the username, the token, and it basically generates a base64 encoded representation of this and prefix this with a basic and a space. And this is the value of the authorization header. So I will show you that Micronaut has methods to simplify this. And here you see the binding of the JSON object to a Pollo. So in Micronaut, in order to do that, what I have done is these two dependencies, Mossy and OKHTTP, I have removed them. I have removed the HTTP builder as well. And one way to use the Micronaut HTTP client in a Grails application is you just add the dependency. So I have here Micronaut HTTP client, and you will see I don't have the Mossy and the OKHTTP client dependencies anymore. And if I show you the bintrate service, let me show it to you. So this is the bintrate service for my Micronaut application. Micronaut has a reactive HTTP client, so I cannot block. But to simplify the migration, I have done the same thing as I was doing before. I am using the blocking HTTP client of Micronaut. So I'm creating a new Micronaut HTTP client with the static create method. I'm gonna basically, with the bintrate API address, and I am calling it to blocking. Typically in a production, you will not use the to blocking. The to blocking you will encounter more in tests. But in this case, this was basically migrating apples to apples. So I have here the URL, and the way you do a request in the client is you do exchange. You supply an HTTP request. The HTTP request in Micronaut has a Fluent API and has a couple of auxiliary methods. So I could have done the same thing. You have a header method where I could have, say, header authorization and call the other method, but Micronaut has already a baked-in basic auth where you will basically pass the username and the password as plain text, and Micronaut will take care of the base64 encoding and the basic space prefix, etc. Then you supply the class that you want to bind to. Remember that in Ruby, the class literally is optional. But basically what you are saying is, I want the response of this request to be binded to a bintrate package. I could actually have, if I didn't want to check the response, I could have done here retrieve. And that will be exactly the same thing. But basically, if you don't want the envelope, you don't want the HTTP response object because you don't care about the HTTP headers in the response, or the status, you can basically use the retrieve. So whenever you are using the HTTP client in Micronaut, typically you will use either exchange if you want both the HTTP response and the body, and retrieve if you care only about the body. So here I care about the response because I wanted to log the status code if something went wrong. So that's why I use the exchange. But yeah, it depends of the use case. Retrieving the body is really easy. You just call body, and since you already told which type you wanted to use, that will take care of it. I've done this change for several services. So we have this change in the GitHub service as well. This service basically fetches the README file or the ASCII-doc file from GitHub. It's a string, and I believe I have a nicer example, which is typically this thing is when you are using Mozy, when you want to bind, when you are basically retrieving a JSON array, and you want the JSON array to be mapped to a list of a POJO, right? In Micronaut, it's really simple because you can supply it an argument of, and you pass list and the POJO that you want to bind the JSON array entries to. In Mozy, this is a bit more convoluted because you have to use a bit of reflection here. So this is the way you will do it in Mozy. It's definitely doable, but it's a bit more convoluted. In Micronaut, the argument of is, I find it myself really, really simple to do. In this example, I am also retrieving the HTTP. I am also, in order to paginate the request to the Bintra API, we need to retrieve some headers. So you see end position header, total header, these methods, they are calling, so this is the object of the headers object, which basically is an object that encapsulates the HTTP headers of the response or of the request. And as you may imagine, it has methods such as get, where you supply the name of the HTTP header and the type that you would like to attempt to bind the header, if there was a header, to. In this case, you will retrieve an optional because maybe the header is not there. So basically really simple. And this is the way I was doing it with OKHTTP, which was simple enough as well. But yeah, it's a bit simpler in Micronaut because you can be a bit more specific about, I want this header and I expect this to be an integer. So attempt to bind it to an integer and see if you can. One thing that is important to know when you are working with the Micronaut HTTP client is Micronaut HTTP client will throw an exception whenever the response of a request is not in the range of the 200 and 300 HTTP status codes. So if you do a request and the server that you are contacting to responds a 500 or a 400 or a 502 because it's currently not available, you will get an exception which wraps the the HTTP response status code and the body of the response. So whenever you are using the Micronaut HTTP client, probably you will want to wrap this calls in a try catch, which is what I am doing here. It happens, for example, here that sometimes the README file in the plugin doesn't exist because the plugin creator didn't create a README file. So if you execute this application, you will get like some 404s and things that are not really errors. It's simply something that the application needs to handle. So what else? So really is a nice migration. Remove two dependencies. You can get rid of Mozy. You can get rid of OKHTTP. You can get rid of the REST client builder and just use the Micronaut HTTP client, which is really integrated into Grails 4. Another thing that I have done is you no longer need to define in here in application.yaml the Grails sprint transaction proxy management false. You can remove that because that's by default. That's no longer applies. I updated a dependency for htdoc because not really Grails for related, but basically this application in particular, when the README file is in htdoc format, it renders as HTML. So I upgraded that file. I upgraded the Twitter for J dependency. So this application tweets when there is a new plugin, I believe. So actually, I didn't change this at all, I believe. I just updated the version and everything didn't break. So basically, when there is a new plugin, when there is a new version, we tweet about it. And this is the Twitter Grails plugins account, I believe. Yeah, this account that obviously the tweets are like using the same structure. So yeah, that's the Twitter account that tweets automatically when new versions of the plugins are released. What else? I took also the opportunity, and I encourage you to do is, so Groovy is a dynamic language that can be statically compiled, and most of Grace classes that you will have, you can annotate them with that compile static, and that will is refactoring. It will allow also more IDE integration, and in general, it will be good for performance as well. And in general, I am of the opinion that if you are not using anything dynamic, if you are using something dynamic, which is great because Grails has a lot of features that require those dynamic capabilities, go ahead and don't statically compile the class. But if you can, such as I could here, I have a controller which basically does, as you may expect, calls a couple of services, creates some models, render them in a view, returns some status codes, etc. So typically, logic of a controller, this can be compiled statically. You don't need to have this as dynamically compiled. So I have go ahead and took the opportunity to do some static compilation. We were using an internal class, which was the org Grails the Grails version class. This class, many classes that were deprecated has been removed in Grails 4, so that class doesn't exist anymore. So what I have done is we have some logic which basically takes two versions of the given a number such as 1.0.0 and a number such as 1.0.2, basically compares them and basically tells us if it is a new version or not. So basically a way of comparing software versions using the typical notation that is used in the whole Grails plugin ecosystem, which is the semantic notation. So I basically I have these two classes, which are basically, if you need them, go ahead. We are using them in many places for the website as well, which give you like flexibility to basically, given a string, create a software version class, and you can compare them between them. So it has functionality to see if the thing is a snapshot, if it's a milestone, if it's a build snapshot, a release candidate, etc. So yeah, if you are in releasing software and you need to compare versions, check these classes because those may come handy. So this is something that you may encounter in your experience while you are migrating some class that has been deprecated. If you are using some internal, if you are not using an internal, you may not encounter anything. I also took the opportunity to add some extra logging. That's more because I sometimes don't log enough. So I have added some debug and trace statements. I have annotated my class with another Groovy AST transform, which is as SLA4J. We have a screencast about Grails logging if you are interested. In guides.grails.org, you should be able to find that. So if you are interested in logging in Grails, check it out. Couple of changes that you will have also in application.yaml is the JMX unique names has changed. You will need to update your file accordingly. So if you see here JMX, it used to be endpoints JMX unique name. Now it's a Spring JMX unique names. Here I have enable the info endpoint and turn on enable by default. So that's exposing my health endpoint. I used to have the endpoints disabled here. I have enabled so if I go now to plugins. I have it here, plugins.grails.org, and I visit the info endpoint. Sorry, the actuator info, because that has changed. This is another change. The Spring Boot actuator endpoints have changed. So the path right now is actuator info. I have here, I am exposing the Git commit as well. So I know which commit has been deployed. And this is, as you can see, it's running Grails version, and also the health endpoint has been exposed. So if you were using in Grails the applications, the Spring Boot actuator endpoints, which are really great, you will need to change the configuration, and the path has changed as well. So that's a breaking change that you should be aware of. When you create a Grails application from scratch, we are including now the Mockito dependency for test. We don't have any Mockito test, but I leave it here as well. And that's about it. I added this also to application YAML. I added this Spring main banner mode off as well. But that's something that I believe that's because when you print the banner of when you start the application, you print the banner of Spring Boot. I don't know if I removed if the banner was printed or not. I just added just to be consistent with Grails for application created from scratch. And that's it. You can see these commits if you are interested and you want to dip the repositories Grails 3 plugins. So it's under the Grails organization. It's the Grails 3 plugins repository. And you will see like Jeff fixed a typo 9 minutes ago. Thank you, Jeff. And yeah, you will see a couple of myself fighting Travis. But before that, you will see all the different changes that I described here. So if you are interested in seeing the change, the commit about replacing OKHTTP with the micro HTTP client, you can see it here. So hopefully that can give you like an overview of what is entailed in such a change. As you see, it's more code deletion than new code. Yeah, that was the upgrade to Grails 3 applications to Grails 4. It took me like around 4 to 5 hours. Actually, it took me more time than I initially thought it will, because I was hitting a problem with timeouts for some requests. So I needed to increase the timeout of the micro HTTP client read timeout, because I was getting some timeouts when I deployed to production. So that's another thing that I wanted to show you, is just you can, the configurations of the micro HTTP client is available at your fingertip in application.yaml as well. So I have the slides here. I'm gonna go fast because I have 10 minutes and I want to leave some time for questions. So important bits about Grails 4 is JDK 8 minimum, JDK 11 compatible. So Grails 4 was the necessary step to be ready for modern Java, basically. Grails 4 applications are currently running Groovy 256. They are running a Spring Boot 219, Spring 5110, Hibernate 540, I believe, when you create the app. Gradle 5 and Micronaut by default the integration is 114. Key takeaway, it's not a Grails 2 to Grails 3 is much, much simpler. Actuator changes, you will need to do the changes because the Spring Boot actuator has changed. Hot reloading, completely possible. Gradle changes, the migration for Gradle 3 to Gradle 5 is a major change. So if your build has custom logic, which you need for your Grails applications, you may need to do additional changes. So that be ready for that. This thing was a big Gradle pain for me. I use this plugin, the rendering plugin, which is a plugin to render PDFs in an application. And this is not a Grails bug, but basically a Gradle has changed this behavior. And for this plugin, which was built with Grails 3, the transitive dependencies of the plugins are no longer brought by default. You have to basically explicitly bring them into your project. So that's if you apply a plugin and you are getting class not found exceptions, think about this thing that Sergio told you is like chances are that the plugin is not the transitive dependencies of the plugin are not being brought into the class path. The changes to the Spring Boot Gradle plugin that I mentioned, if you build a Grails plugin, the boot repackage enabled has been changed, so you will need to change that as well. For Gorm, we have, as well as for Glaze, there are a lot of deprecations which have been removed. There has been some package restructuring as well. So yes, be aware of that. This is probably the biggest change in Gorm is Gorm no longer creates custom proxy factories. It doesn't abrupt automatically hibernate proxies. So if you have such code in a Grails application where you have a domain class named pet, and then you have a domain class named dog, which extends of pet, and then the person has one pet, if you retrieve a person with the get method in the domain class and you use the Java instance of, so Gorm has a method named instance of with the O in uppercase. That's not a type of the slides, that's a Gorm method. So the other one is the Java instance of. So all of these will work. However, in Grails 4, the first instance of will fail. So if just my advice for this will be, when you do the migration, search for instance of domain classes. And if you have those, if possible, replace them with the use of the instance of method, because that will be more robust. The Grails validation, which was a bit duplicated, was both in Grails validation and in Gorm, and now it has remained in Gorm. So this is the whole thing to power constraints validation. Another thing that you will see is in Grails, this is due to Hibernate changes. Hibernate is much more strict now about the existence of a transaction. So it's really important in Grails applications to be more, to basically express transaction demarcations. Remember, Gorm has an add transaction annotation. It has also an add read-only annotation, which is a synonym for add transactional with read-only true. So if you are using a read transaction, just use the read-only annotation. If you are using a write transaction, use the add transactional. If you are using Gorm data services, Gorm data services will take care of adding those annotations and those transaction demarcations for you. So those are not required, but in general, be aware that if you see the transaction required exception, that's probably an issue with that. Gorm, you will need to upgrade the Gorm version. So Gorm 7 is compatible with Grails 4. Hibernate Core, you will need to update it as well. This is an example of a request using so Grails data store REST client is deprecated. You use the Micronaut HTTP client. You will need to do some changes in your code, but there will be, for the better, it's really a really small change. You will see once you get the Fluent API syntax of the Micronaut HTTP client, is really simple things. This request shown here is doing a put request with a basic auth specifying a particular content type, and in the body of the request is specifying a JSON object. So this is old code that you typically will do with the REST client builder. This is the same code that you will use with the Micronaut HTTP client. So I have a map. I can pass the map as the payload of the request. Automatically, that will be transformed into a JSON object. By default, Micronaut assumes that you are working with JSON. We have methods for basic auth and for content type. So as you will expect, and as we discussed before in the example, you can either do a exchange or retrieve depending on whether you want the HTTP response envelope or not. There are, of course, Groovy changes as well, which are breaking changes, especially if you are using the data extensions, you will probably need to add the date dependency explicitly. But yeah, in general, my experience with Groovy 2.5.6 coming from older versions of Groovy is more strict about compilation, which I appreciate. Yeah, in general, it feels much more robust. Plugins, and this applies also to the regular application. If you are touching the Spring internals, so you will need to check the Spring migration guide because chances are something has changed. Especially the Spring Boot embedded server has a lot of changes in the API, and the Grails domain class has been deprecated. I believe you can do the same with the GORM persistence API. So that was the reason of the deprecation. So yeah, if you were using either internal classes of Grails, you may have some additional work. In Grails 3, we used to, by default, use JEP 1x because JEP 1x was compatible with JDK 1.7, and we wanted to keep compatibility with JDK 1.7. Since the baseline of Grails for applications is JDK 8, you can use JEP. Actually, you can use JEP 3.2, I believe is the latest version, or 2.3, I always mistake. But basically, you can use the latest version of JEP and the latest version of Selenium, and you should get up and running. I recommend you to use the WebDriver binaries Gradle plugin, which will ease the WebDriver download dependencies. So yeah, check it out. We have some good guides about this in the guides.grails.org. Also, create a JEP config file if you don't have it already. Asset pipeline, update the asset pipeline plugin. This may have many benefits, including security. So make sure to update the asset pipeline plugin. The Spring Security Core plugin has a release candidate which is compatible with Grails 4. We probably released a stable version soon. We have guides in the Grails website which use the Spring Security Core plugin, so make sure to check those as well. This is not a Grails 4 thing, but this is a thing that we changed in Grails 3, and is the automatic injection of services in a domain class is deprecated, so you cannot do that by default. So before, if you use the Spring Security Core plugin, the password encoding was being done directly in the domain class because the Spring Security service is being injected. Instead, the recommending approach is to use GORM listeners. So when you use the Spring Security Core plugin and you run S2 Quick Start, you will see that a password listener is created for you, which uses the listener annotation, which is a synchronous annotations to capture GORM events. So yeah, check the async.grails.org because those async capability that we'll introduce in Grails 3 now is, if you are doing a migration, it's a good chance to take the opportunity to benefit of those. Yeah, and you will see that if you use the S2 Quick Start, a new bin is registered for you. This is a big change. If you are using Spring Security Core, you will need to add, you will need to prefix the encrypted passwords that you have in the database with the algorithm that you are using. So by default, the Spring Security Core uses bcrypt. So you probably need to run an update query in your database to add this bcrypt prefix before the encrypted password to basically tell that you are using that. So yeah, make sure to read that. That's in the Grails Spring Security Core migration. That's probably one change that you will need to do for sure. And that may surprise you. I am running out of time, so I already saw a lot of integration with Micronaut. I want to show a couple of things that we have in the website before I go to the questions. Sorry, in guides.grails.org. We have an example of using a Micronaut add configuration properties. So you can define a configuration properties which you define as a pollo. With a prefix, you can have a configuration in your application.yaml that will be automatically binded to this pollo, and you can inject this Micronaut pollo in Grails artifacts such as taglib. The only difference between regular Spring Beans is that you need to use the auto-wired annotation. But apart from that, you can inject as you normally may expect. We have a nice guide about the Micronaut HTTP client as well, which shows case how to use the Micronaut HTTP client in a test, which is actually really easy. So this is an integration test. The thing that you will need to do is you add an cert HTTP client and you use the ones before annotation. Server port is the Grails application will start in a random port, and that's exposed by the server port variable. So you don't need to declare that. That's exposed automatically for you thanks to that integration. And you can create basically the HTTP client to use that base URL. And that's it. Then you can do a request against your Grails API as you are used to. And in general, you will see that so we have been updating Grails to Grails 4. So you will see the Grails 4 guide of the versions, and you will see that most of them are already upgraded. This is a video, so this is why it's not upgraded, but most of the guides are already upgraded, and we will keep doing that. So you will see a lot of Micronaut integrations in those applications. Thanks everyone for joining.